Hi, folks. You're very welcome. And I'm so delighted to have somebody with me today, Kim Scott. Kim, as many of you will know, is the author of the bestseller Radical Candor, which is how to be a kick-ass boss. And here's the critical part, without losing your humanity. And Kim knows a lot about that. She's been around the block. She's not one of these authors who writes from a theoretical background. Kim led AdSense, YouTube, and DoubleClick online sales and operations at Google. And then she joined Apple to develop leadership seminars. She has been a CEO coach at Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, and several other tech companies. Previously, she was the co-founder and the CEO of Juice Software, a collaboration software startup, and led business development at Delta 3 and Capital Thinking. Earlier in her career, she worked as a senior policy advisor at the FCC, managed a pediatric clinic in Kosovo, started a diamond cutting factory in Moscow, and was an analyst on a Soviet companies fund. She received her MBA from Harvard Business School and her BA from Princeton University. Besides Radical Candor, she is also the author of 3 novels, which we may get to touch upon later on. Probably most importantly in Kim's life, she has 2 twins whom she raises with her husband, Andy Scott, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So apologies for stumbling my way through that, Kim, but you're very, very welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, and you can do my introduction anytime. That was pretty good.
Thank you so much. And you know, genuinely, we do have several people on the program who did actually have read the book and said, "Look, if you could get Kim Scott, it'd be a runaway success," because they said what you talk about in Radical Candor is very much what we talk about as kind of compassion with an edge to it, as in compassion that's not all cuddly and unicorns and rainbows, but compassion for people, but with a real practical business edge to it. So I know a lot of people are excited to hear how what you write about in Radical Candor interfaces with what we're doing on the Mindful Leader program.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here and excited to talk with you about it. I really admire the work that you all do and agree. There's a big commonality.
Yeah, there's so much crossover, and I had read the book a couple of years back, and it was only in preparing for the interview again when I went back through it, I thought, geez, you know, there is so much of what you say that tunes into what we do. But for the people who haven't read the book, and by the way, folks, it is a steal. It really is a steal on Amazon Kindle. And you could be reading it, you know, 5 minutes after the interview today. It is very, and I'm not going to say it's probably going to slightly embarrass Kim, but it's really easy reading. It's very meaty. There's a lot of great content, but it's very, very easy to read. But what I thought would be useful, Kim, is if we gave the folks just an overview of what Radical Candor is and you know, the core idea behind the book.
Exactly. The core idea is really pretty simple. In order to help people grow, in order to be a great boss, help people grow, give people feedback, build a cohesive team, achieve great results, at the core of it is a relationship, a good relationship. But the relationship between a boss and an employee is not like any other relationship in our lives. It's not a friendship. It's not family. Better not be a romance. So what is it? How can you describe the nature of this relationship? And I think that there are really 2 things you need to focus on at once in order to build that relationship. And one is you've got to care personally about the people who you work with, the people who you work most closely with, especially if you're a boss, your direct reports. But it also goes for your colleagues and your boss. So in other words, it's kind of the same idea, up, down, and sideways. It doesn't follow the rules of the hierarchy. So you've got to have a relationship, a real human relationship, working with somebody day in and day out, helping a group of people coalesce and form a cohesive team involves a relationship, and it's a very human one. And I think all too often, early in our careers, we get told, be professional. Yeah. And you're usually 18, 19, 20 years old. And you're right at that moment in your life when your ego is quite fragile, but your persona is beginning to solidify. And for all too many people, this notion of be professional gets translated to mean leave your emotions, leave your true self, leave your humanity, leave everything that's best about you, real about you at home, and come to work like some kind of robot. And you can't possibly form relationships if you're showing up at work like some kind of robot. So that's care personally. And, when we're lucky, we really actually get to love the people who we work with. Love in the most professional sense of the word, not in the destroying sense of the word. And that is so important because we spend more time at work than we do in any other part of our lives. And so we may as well have real, meaningful relationships at work. However, the Beatles got it wrong. Love is not all you need. There's also this other dimension of radical candor, challenge directly dimension, second dimension of radical candor. And the problem with challenge directly begins not when we're 18, 19, 20 years old and getting our first job, but when we're 18 months old and just learning to speak. And we have a parent who comes along and says, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Classic.
And for an awful lot of people, that's the beginning of the end, and then you become a boss. And now after a lifetime of training, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. It's your job to say it. It's your job to speak up. And that's hard. It's very hard to undo sort of an instinct that's been pounded into your head since you learned to speak.
Sure. And tell me, the care personally side of things, I mean, when we talk about mindfulness and mindful leadership and so on, the moment we mention the empathy word or mention the compassion word, you get people, particularly of my vintage, people who have a little bit of silver in their head, tend to kind of pull back a little bit. Do you get folks, when you talk about care personally, do you ever see people flinch in your programs?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I mean, there's probably an infinite number of reasons, but two of the most common ones are, one, caring personally, it means something very different than trying to be friends with your employees or trying to be popular with your employees. It means that often I describe being a boss as like a lonely one-way street. It means you're concerned for their growth, but you're not. It's unlike a friendship. It's not always reciprocal. You're giving, and you're sort of paying it forward almost. Right. So that's one of the differences. I think the other part of the difference between a friendship and the kind of care you're focused on the people who work for you is you're really responsible for helping people grow in their careers. Sure. And of course, as a friend, one of your roles is to hold up a mirror and tell somebody when they're making a mistake, but you're not necessarily responsible for their professional growth. And so there's a lot more challenge directly that has to happen in the boss-employee relationship than necessarily has to happen in a friendship or a parent-child relationship, although all those relationships require some challenge directly. And so I think that part of the problem is that when a leader tries to be popular, they're on the path to hell, right? Right. Because one of the things I found is that if a couple of people on my team aren't mad at me at any given point in time, I'm probably not doing my job as their boss. And that's hard. I mean, nobody likes having people be angry. No. And so it's so important to remind people that the caring, if you really care about somebody's growth, you are going to challenge them, even if it means that they're upset or unhappy with you, or that maybe you've even hurt their feelings in the short term, right? Because one of the problems with empathy is a short-term, long-term thing. The other problem with care personally is that if you're too concerned for the short-term feelings, you're not going to focus on the long-term, and you're not going to tell people things they need to know in order to succeed in the job.
Yeah, and I guess on the challenge directly side of things, I mean, there's always been those two sort of classic bosses, the buddy as boss type boss, and then the other, the dragon, the Taylor style boss. And I guess with the way we've gone in terms of correcting the workplace and sort of political correctness and the way we deal with people, I guess the hard asses, if you'll excuse the language, are probably less inclined to be as hard ass, and the people who have spent a whole lifetime really not challenging are going to find it hard to overcome that. Is it possible for somebody to be trained to get that right level of challenging directly?
Yes, absolutely. As it's also possible for somebody to be taught to care personally. It's
Yeah.
very fun. I think that often we believe that people just know how to have productive
Sure.
relationships.
Yeah.
Work. Often. And we often believe that people know how to challenge directly, but they don't often know how to raise concerns productively. I think one of the false dichotomies that plague a lot of us is that we think we have to choose between being nice and being an asshole. And that's not a fair choice. That's a false dichotomy. When I first became a manager, I was starting the software company, and I got an article emailed to me from about 10 or 15 different people at the company. And it was about how most people would rather have a boss who's a real jerk, a real hard ass, as you say, than one who is nice but incompetent. And I thought, am I getting this because I'm nice but incompetent, or because I'm a jerk?
What you trying to tell me?
Yeah, surely those are not my two choices.
Yeah.
And the truth is that, again, radical candor gets measured not at my mouth, but at your ear. And so I may think I'm really showing you that I care about you by criticizing something that you've done. Sure. But if I'm saying it in such a way that your lizard brain is engaged, you're not hearing me, and I'm just wasting my breath. And as far as you're concerned, I'm a jerk besides. So you need to learn how to communicate differently with different people.
And it's very interesting you mentioned the lizard brain, because that obviously informs a lot of the work we do as well when we talk about emotional intelligence and people getting triggered and the effect it has on their stress. So in your model, when you talk about radical candor, you say these two things, caring personally and challenge directly, must be there to be a kick-ass boss who won't lose their humanity, but they must be carefully balanced. And there's basically three ways to get it wrong and one way to get it right, right? And I think you talk about ruinous empathy if somebody just cares too much and challenges too little.
Yeah, one of the worst moments of my career explains ruinous empathy pretty clearly. I had hired this guy, we'll call him Bob, and I really liked Bob. He was nice, he was charming, he was funny. He would do stuff like, one time we were at a manager offsite, and we were playing one of those endless get-to-know-you games, and it was taking a ton of time. We were all really stressed. We just actually needed to get back to work, but none of us wanted to be the person who said, oh, I don't have time to get to know you people. And Bob was the guy who had the courage to say, you know, this is taking a lot of time, and I have a different idea that'll be really fast. Whatever his idea was, if it was really fast, we were going to agree to it. And he said,
yeah, that's good.
Let's just go around the table and confess what candy our parents used when potty training us. Weird but fast, weird yet. We all remembered. And then for the next 10 months, every time there was a tense moment in a meeting, Bob would whip out just the right piece of candy for the right person at the right moment. So anyway, that was funny. He was kind of fun and quirky, but he was fun to work with. We all liked Bob. One problem with Bob, he was doing terrible work. Absolutely terrible work. He would hand stuff into me, and there was shame in his eyes. He knew that he wasn't doing a good enough job. And I was so puzzled because he had this amazing resume, this history of great accomplishments. I learned later the problem was that he was smoking pot in the bathroom 3 times a day, which maybe explained all that candy he had at all times. But anyway, I didn't know any of that at the time. All I knew is Bob wasn't doing good work. And so when he would hand this stuff in to me, I would say to him something along the lines of, "Oh, Bob, this is a great start, but you're so smart. You're so awesome. We all love working with you. Maybe you could make it a little better." And of course he did.
Yeah.
Let's kind of double click on why I did that. Part of it, the biggest part, I think, was ruinous empathy. I really did like Bob, and I really didn't want to hurt his feelings, his short-term feelings. But the other part of the problem was was sort of what happens in the bottom left quadrant, which we'll talk more about in a moment, which is what I call manipulative insincerity. Part of the problem, part of the problem was that Bob was popular in the office, and he was also kind of sensitive. And I was afraid if I told him that his work wasn't nearly good enough, he would start to cry or get upset, and everybody would think I was a big jerk. And I didn't want that reputation as a leader. So this goes on for 10 months, me kind of pulling my punches with Bob. And eventually the inevitable happens because the whole team is having to cover for Bob, having to redo his work. And I realized that if I don't fire Bob, I'm going to lose all my star performers. It's a little startup. I can't afford for that to happen. So I sit down to tell Bob where things stand. And Bob looks at me when I'm finished talking. He kind of pushes his chair back from the table and he says, "Why didn't you tell me?"
Yeah.
And as that question is going around in my head with no good answer, he says, "Why didn't anyone tell me? I thought you all cared about me." And now I realize that I have failed Bob in a bunch of different ways. I have failed to solicit feedback from him. Maybe I was doing something that was driving him so crazy he was forced to toke up in the bathroom. I don't know, and I never will, because I didn't ask. I didn't understand from his perspective what was going well and also what was going badly. And I failed to give him praise that was meaningful. The kind of praise I gave him was really just a head fake or an ego salve. And I also failed to give him the kind of criticism he needed to know when his work wasn't nearly good enough. And probably worst of all, I failed to create the kind of environment in which everyone would tell Bob what was genuinely great about working with him and when he was going off the rails. And because I wanted to be nice to Bob and not hurt his feelings, now he's getting fired because of it, right? Not so nice after all. And I realized in that moment, I mean, and at this point, it was too late to say Bob. Even he agreed he should go. But in the moment, I realized the only thing I could do was to make myself a very solemn promise that I would never make that mistake again. And that is really why I came up with this framework and why I wrote the book and why I'm talking to you, because I want other people also to avoid those painful moments in their career.
And that really puts her in perspective, because this side of the quadrant is, or the model is where I've lived and struggled an awful lot of my life, and it's the people pleaser side of the border, isn't it? Where, as you say, it always ends badly because people never appreciate the fact that you were smiling to their face, and as they would see it, stabbing them in the back or maybe even stabbing them in the front, you know, by your inaction.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the alternative then, you know, and I don't know, I'd say some of the people watching this who fall into people pleaser will probably have done the flip flop, where then they flip over and they maybe end up on this side a little bit too.
And one of the problems here is that things pile up when you don't say something, you don't say something, you don't say something. Eventually, you're so frustrated by the person that you explode, right? Yeah. And that's one of the most common reasons for obnoxious aggression. You may actually care about the person, but you're so annoyed by this thing that keeps repeating itself, in part because you haven't pointed out it's a problem. An extreme example of this was, I was talking to this guy who he got married, and he was thrilled to be married, loved his wife, obviously. But she clicked her spoon on her teeth in the morning when they ate cereal, and it bugged him. But he didn't want to nitpick. He didn't want to be a nag, so he didn't say anything. And this goes on for 5 years, and it's driving him crazier and crazier. And finally, he just jumps up one morning, is like, we gotta get a divorce. I mean, I'm sure there were other problems in the marriage. But sometimes these little things, if you don't correct them, can turn into big problems, not just for the other person, but in your relationship. So that's one of the reasons why I think we zoom from ruinous empathy to obnoxious aggression, because we let stuff pile up. It's like sometimes things that bother us, it's like they go critical and blow up like a dirty bomb all over your relationship.
But when you get the balance right, that's where you're talking about what you call radical candor.
Yes, when you can show the person that you're telling them something to be helpful, and when you're humble in the way that maybe you're wrong. Radical candor is a gift in one of two ways. It's a gift either because you're pointing out a problem that's a real problem and thereby giving the person an opportunity to fix it, or it's a gift because you are wrong, but the only way that you give the person an opportunity to correct your thinking is if you tell them what you're thinking.
Sure.
So you got to go into these conversations being willing to be wrong. And by the way, radical candor is not all about giving criticism. There's an order of operations to radical candor. And the first is to solicit feedback, to ask for criticism. And this is especially important for a leader because I think one of the best tools that we have for self-awareness and also relational awareness is when other people hold up a mirror. We rely on each other for self-awareness and relational awareness to a great extent. And when you become a leader of any sort, a manager, even if you have only one or two direct reports and you don't feel super powerful, that other person is reluctant to hold up a mirror. Is very reluctant. And so it is your job to lay the power down and create an environment where it is not only safe, but required that the other person will criticize you. And that's really hard to do. So the order of number one in the order of operations is solicit feedback, mostly criticism. Item number two in the order of operations of radical candor is giving praise. One of the most important things you do as a leader is show people what success looks like. And praise is the best way to do that. So the other reason to take a moment to give voice to the things you appreciate about working with other people is that very often what happens in ruinous empathy is that this one thing that's bugging us bugs us more and more and more and more because we're not saying anything. And pretty soon we can't see the good anymore. So it also helps to reset our own thinking. And once you've solicited feedback, understood the other person's perspective, taken the time to remember the things you appreciate about the person and actually give voice to them, it becomes much easier to go into a conversation where you say, I see a problem. Is now a good time for me to talk to you about it? And then again, to state your intention to be helpful and to actually have the intention to be helpful. You're not trying to kick somebody in the shins. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm just wondering, so how do I know when I've arrived in a place where I'm exercising radical candor? One of them is obviously I'm continually checking myself to make sure that I'm soliciting feedback on myself and I'm making it okay for people to make it as direct as possible. And secondly, I'm looking for opportunities to praise people genuinely. And I know in the book you talk about making sure it's praise, not flattery. I'm not sure that's the expression you use, but that it's genuine. So what else if I wanted to? I'm a real program guy. And so I would go and I'd put this in my diary to remind me every morning, hey, look for some feedback. Hey, give some praise. What are the other things that if I'm doing them, I'm exercising radical candor? How do I audit myself?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the atomic building block of management are these impromptu feedback conversations, both soliciting criticism and giving praise and giving criticism. And it's very difficult to operationalize impromptu 2-minute conversations. In fact, I tried. I built an app and it didn't work. But here is the kind of mental checklist that I find most helpful. You want to make sure that with every person, first of all, you want to make sure you don't have too many direct reports. An important aspect of human relationships is that they don't scale. You can't have too many of them.
Sure. Then you're no longer direct.
Yeah, exactly. So I think 5 direct reports, 7 at most would be a good number. And you want to make sure with each of those people that you actually spend some time one-on-one with them, ideally each week, 45 minutes a week for each person. Again, some people have 15 direct reports. That's not possible, but in an ideal world, that's it. And at the end of your one-on-one is a great time to solicit feedback.
Sure.
And there are kind of 4 things to think about when you're soliciting feedback. The first one, and by the way, if people only do this one thing as a result of listening to our conversation, it'll be a very productive use of time.
Right.
Think about what is your go-to question. How are you going to ask? Because if you say, do you have any feedback for me? I can already tell you what the answer is. Oh no, everything's fine.
No, boss. Yeah.
So what you want to do is you want to think about how you're going to ask, and it needs to kind of put people a little on the spot, but it also needs to be authentic to you. So for example, I like to ask, what could I do or stop doing that would make it easier to work with me? But I was working with Krista Quarles, who's the CEO of OpenTable, and she said, I could never imagine those words coming out of my mouth. The question I like to ask is, tell me why I'm smoking crack. So,
no, I love that.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to ask the same thing. You got to ask in the way that
works for you.
Yeah, that works for you, but also that is authentic, that shows people that you really want to hear. And by the way, there's no magic words. You have to really want to hear.
Yeah, and they have to know from the way you present it. Kim, and I'm sorry to go on a kind of a tangent, but you touched on something else that you mentioned in the book, and that is, I always remember one line from a Harvard Business Review article from years and years ago called Job Sculpting. And they said, you got to know your top performers better than they know themselves to help them sculpt the careers of their dreams. And that's essentially what you say in the book is you really got to know who they are. So do you understand where they're going, and you make them fellow travelers, you make your goal aligned with their goal. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that 45 minutes, a week session with those folks becomes very important in that context, right?
Yes. Your one-on-one conversations where you get the daily sort of nuances of what's going on with the person are really important. And you want to make sure that they are setting the agenda and that you're using that time to be a real thought partner to them.
Okay.
And this is true for all your, not only your top performers, but all your direct reports.
Sure.
You want to make sure that you understand what's going on with them. What are the new ideas they have that are just, the new ideas are so easily squished.
Sure.
And destroyed. What are the new ideas they have that are not yet ready for the full-fledged debate, but that need to be nurtured? And you need to take the time to help people clarify their thinking in the one-on-one, in your weekly one-on-ones. Another really good use of that time, probably once a year, is to step back from the day-to-day and have career conversations.
Great.
Talk to the person about sort of their life story. And it's funny, this is one of the most controversial. It seemed like it did not seem controversial to me, so it was a big surprise, but it's one of the most controversial suggestions I make in the book is start the conversation with beginning with kindergarten. Tell me about your life.
Right.
And some people really would rather stick a sharp stick in their eye than talk to their boss about their childhood.
Yeah.
So you've got to respect that. I mean, the care personally doesn't mean get creepily personal or overshare or anything like that. But you want to understand kind of, to the extent that people are comfortable talking about it with you, you want to understand the arc of someone's life.
Okay.
What are the transitions they've made in their life and why?
Hmm.
And if you really understand those, you'll begin to get a sense of what motivates people. What gives their work meaning for them? What are the things that they are getting out of work? And it's really important to understand that. If somebody is really motivated by learning and growth versus somebody else is really motivated by financial independence, and somebody else is really, it's very important to understand those, what values people have and what drives them at work. And you'll do a much better job putting them on projects where they thrive and where the whole team thrives. So that's the first of the 3 career conversations. The next conversation, and so this is sort of 3 101s per year dedicated to these kinds of conversations. The next conversation that I think is really productive is to talk about someone's dreams for the future.
Right.
And at the height of your career, give me 3 different scenarios of what it looks like when you've got everything you want. The reason to give people 3 different scenarios is that very few people know what they want to do or who they want to be when they grow up, even if they're already 50 years old. And those who do know that very clearly confuse the hell out of the rest of us who are still kind of struggling. So you want to give people a room to dream, right? You really want to give them the opportunity to share their dreams with you. And this will help you understand what kind of growth trajectory the person is on, wants to be on in the long term, but also where are they right now? Where are they right now? Somebody may have great ambitions, but great ambitions in their career to achieve something, but at this moment they have 2 ill parents, and the last thing they want is a promotion, right? They need to take care. And then the third conversation is, so push this to the employee to say, what are the skills that you need to develop to achieve each of your dreams? And then what can we do to change your job in maybe big ways or maybe in small ways that help you build those skills? Right. And so, maybe what I really need to work on is my analytical skills. So I'm going to put you on these 3 projects. And also maybe you as the boss a lot of people, maybe, or a few people. You have a network of people, and you can make introductions for the person to learn about some career that they may be interested in pursuing in the long term. And then there may be training that the person could do, books you could buy for the person, but things you can do to help them develop the skills. And now all of a sudden, even if the job they're in now is not the job, one of those 3 dreams they described, they're taking a step in the direction of those dreams. And the thing that is really important about having career conversations that way is that it avoids the kind of petty career ladder sort of nonsense that a lot of people get sucked into. Like, what are the 4 things I have to do that I don't really want to do to get this next promotion? Like, that's depressing. Yeah. And then I think the other thing that it avoids is the boss who comes in and thinks that they have to provide meaning. You are not some kind of messiah. You're a boss. And people find their own meaning. And it's your job as a boss to be humble enough and curious enough to ask people what gives their work meaning. And also to make yourself vulnerable enough, maybe, to show why the work has meaning for you. But just because it has a particular meaning for you doesn't mean that that's going to work for someone else. One of my favorite stories is of the architect who's rebuilding after the Great Fire of London, the cathedral. And he's walking around and he talks to one guy and he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm laying bricks." And he talks to another guy He says, what are you doing? And he says, I'm building a wall. And he talks to a third guy and he says, what are you doing? And he says, I'm building a cathedral to the Almighty. And I think very often leaders think it's their job to tell everybody that they're building a cathedral to the Almighty. But for a lot of people, laying bricks may be very satisfying.
Yeah.
And maybe they're an atheist and they don't care about building a cathedral to the Almighty, but they do care about the precision of laying the bricks or coming up with a more efficient way to do it. And so understanding that and making room for different people to find meaning and purpose in their lives and in their work is important.
And I thought, and that was something actually I was going to ask you about, was purpose, because you say in a way that runs contrary to an awful lot of the thinkers out there on leadership and management. They'll say that it's your responsibility or it's part of your job as a boss to bring purpose and to help people, to give them a purpose and give meaning to the work. But what you're doing is you're helping them to uncover the meaning for themselves and to uncover a purpose that's meaningful to them.
Yes, exactly. And maybe they've already uncovered it. You're just getting to know them and learning it.
Yeah, and learning how to make yourselves fellow travelers. Listen, I'm conscious I've only kind of touched into that much of where I'd like to go on this topic, because it's obviously a huge topic. But there was one thing you said in the book, and you said it very, very early on, and it really got me thinking. You said, when I sit talking with somebody who tells me they're struggling with the people side of being a leader, the people side of being a manager, that after a couple of minutes, I can make them feel much better about their lives, much better about their jobs. How do you do that? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that people feel like they can't come in and apply what they already know about how to have human relationships, good relationships at work. They feel like there's some sort of other person they have to become or other set of skills that they have to develop. And helping people see that just applying what they already know about how to build a good relationship is useful at work.
Yeah.
Is really helpful. And I also think helping people break free of this, I have to choose between being too nice and being a jerk.
That's big.
And if I'm too nice, I'm doomed to failure. If I'm a jerk, maybe I'm successful, but I'm a jerk and I don't want to be a jerk. And I think that helping people see the success beyond success of building these relationships at work and achieving results that in a way that allows them to be their fullest and best selves is liberating for a lot of people.
Sure.
But it depends on who I'm talking to. Sometimes I'll talk to someone and they will think that they have a communication problem, that they just can't say things in a way that doesn't upset other people. And so they don't say anything at all. And as I talk to them, it's really important to understand whether the problem is a communication problem or a fundamental self-awareness and relational awareness problem. Sometimes as you talk, you'll realize this person just really thinks they're smarter than everybody else. And those are the harder conversations, because then the person really does have real work to do. And saying, look, you don't have a communication problem. Your problem is that you feel a sense of superiority to the people you work with, and people pick up on that. And you're going to have to address it. Like, that's not a 2-minute easy fix conversation.
Sure. And I think what's really beautiful about the model you put together is because it does get those two would-be opposite ends of the continuum, but doesn't put them on opposite ends. It puts them as different dimensions. That challenge directly, which you must do, and that care personally. Now, if anybody picking up your book, and I could tell anybody who hasn't read Kim's book yet, that it is really practical. One of the criticisms I've heard leveled at some books and some of the articles that we've reviewed during the program is that they're great, but where's the how-to and where's the practical guidance? And your book is loaded with that. So I would say, folks, go and grab it, and the details are going across the bottom there, where you can pick it up on Kindle and you can pick it up on Amazon. But for somebody, Kim, who would prefer to go along and learn in a different way other than reading the book, are there programs for coaches, consultants, trainers who want to assist their clients in introducing the principles of radical candor into their leadership?
Yes, absolutely. We do radical candor keynotes. So we come and we'll do talks, and there's a whole group of us. So we're building a practice around the ideas in the book. Jason Rosoff and Amy, who you know.
Yes, indeed.
Yes. They're fantastic partners, and there are a number of other candor coaches as well. So we do talks. We also do workshops with people. Some of them can be an hour long, can be a 2-day workshop. So we really do a deep dive on some of the ideas in the book and help people put into practice the ideas, because it's easy to say be radically candid, but it's really hard to do. And it's about that day in and day out practice. So the talks and the workshops, I think, are really helpful for people.
Great. And tell me, is the workshop aimed at a leader who wants to bring radical candor into the business, or aimed at somebody who's going to work with leaders bringing radical candor into the business, or trying to create that?
You know, it's really interesting. One of the things that I have discovered is that the core job of a manager, sort of giving feedback, building a team, achieving results, is not actually that different whether you're the CEO of a 100,000 person company or a brand new manager. Like a lot of the difficulties are very human and very much the same. So there are some of the core workshops are remarkably similar for very senior audiences and also managers. But then we also have some that are more focused on new manager skills, on becoming a manager, and also some CEO and senior level.
And that's on the site radicalcandor.com?
Yes, exactly.
Super. Well, look, Kim, thank you so much. And honestly, I could run and run and run with this, because what I want to tell everybody is we've touched about that much of a book that's about that wide in terms of the scope of what it covers, because we've really only touched upon the basic ideas. And then Kim, in the second part of the book, really starts to plow into how to, and how do you dig into this, and how do you operationalize it. So Kim, thank you so very much. And please God, all of these sensible folks will rush out and grab a copy of the book, and we'll have an awful lot more radical candor in the 800 some organizations that are represented in this group. So thank you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And please have people reach out to me. I always love to get radical candor on radical candor. Tell me what's working and what's not working about the ideas in the book. It's great.
Great. Well, I tell you what, we'll make a particular point on the next session of appealing to people to do exactly that. As I say, you've already got some fans in the group who had requested that we reach out. So I dare say, be careful what you wish for. But in the meantime, thank you so much, Kim. Really, thank you a million.
Really appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks a billion. Take care.